The walls of the black site prison sweated in the relentless heat, thick droplets running down concrete like tears the building had cried for decades. Inside cell number 47, Colonel James Garrett pressed his back against stone that had absorbed the screams of better men than him. His wrists were raw from the rope, skin peeled back to show meat underneath, but the pain had become white noise 3 weeks ago. What kept him awake now was the silence. The Soviet interrogator had stopped coming 2 days prior. That meant one of two things. Either Washington had finally negotiated his release, or they had decided he knew too much to ever leave this place breathing. Garrett had been a Marine long enough to know which option carried better odds. The prison existed in a place that did not appear on any map, somewhere in the mountains along the Soviet sphere of influence, where captured American servicemen could be held indefinitely without the inconvenience of international law. Garrett had been here since 1972, when his reconnaissance aircraft went down over territory that the United States would never officially acknowledge operating in. 13 years, 4,745 days. He had stopped counting months ago, but the number was burned into his brain like a brand. He used the last of his strength to drag his body across the floor, fingernails scraping grooves into the dirt and grime that no amount of prison labor could ever fully clean. In the corner where the guards could not see, he found the loose brick he had been working on for 6 months. His fingers, swollen and broken in 3 places, pried it free. Behind the brick was a cavity the size of a fist. Inside that cavity, wrapped in plastic torn from a ration bag, was a piece of paper no larger than a playing card. Garrett had stolen the pencil stub from a guard who got careless during a celebration. He had saved it for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. His hands shook as he wrote. Not from fear. Fear had left him somewhere around month 4. The shaking came from malnutrition and the fever that had been cooking his brain for the last 72 hours. The words came slowly, each letter a small battle against the tremor in his muscles. Grid coordinates: 35 degrees, 20 minutes north, 69 degrees, 30 minutes east. Then below it, in smaller script because the space was running out and there was still so much to say. They are still there. The truth is buried with them. He did not write his name. Anyone who found this would either know who wrote it or would not care. He did not write the date. Time had stopped meaning anything in this place. What he did write, in the final inch of space at the bottom, were 3 words that took the last reserve of strength he had saved for 16 months of captivity. Tell Sarah everything. Sarah, his granddaughter. 5 years old the last time he saw her, running through his backyard in Montana with pigtails bouncing and a gap-toothed smile that could melt glaciers. She would be 6 now, maybe 7. Time moved different in hell. Garrett folded the paper, wrapped it back in plastic, and returned it to the cavity. He replaced the brick with the careful precision of a man who had built demolition charges under fire. When the guards found his body in the morning, they would find nothing. When the prison was finally decommissioned decades from now, when some curious soul pulled apart these walls to see what secrets they held, they would find everything. He lay back down on the concrete floor and closed his eyes. The fever was winning now. He could feel it spreading through his organs like fire through dry timber. In his delirium, he saw Sarah again, older now, a woman, strong like her grandmother, smart like her mother, stubborn like him. The last thought Colonel James Garrett had before the darkness took him was simple and clear. She will finish this. Then the darkness came, and the walls of the nameless prison added one more ghost to its collection. 49 years later, the sun rose over Marine Corps Base Quantico with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a cold front pushes through Virginia in late autumn. The temperature hovered at 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind carried the smell of pine and gunpowder from the rifle ranges that had been firing since 0400 hours. Staff Sergeant Sarah Garrett stood on the 1,000-yard line of Range 4, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated before they could rise more than a few inches. She wore the standard Marine Corps shooting jacket, forest green with reinforced shoulders, but the jacket hung loose on her frame in a way that made the range officer frown every time he saw her. At 4 feet 11 inches tall, Sarah Garrett was the smallest person to ever attempt the Marine Corps Scout Sniper course. She was also, as of 16 minutes ago, the highest scoring graduate in the program's 42-year history. The target downrange was a standard E-type silhouette, man-sized, placed at precisely 1,000 yards. The wind was gusting at 22 miles per hour from the northwest. The mirage was dancing across the landscape in waves that made the target shimmer and split into ghosts of itself. Sarah settled into her firing position behind the M40A6 rifle, the weapon that had been her constant companion for the last 3 months. The stock pressed against her cheek with the familiar pressure of an old friend. Her right eye found the scope, and the world narrowed down to a circle of magnified reality. She controlled her breathing. 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out. Her heart rate dropped from 62 beats per minute to 54, then to 48. The rifle rose and fell with the gentle rhythm of her chest, and she waited for the pause between heartbeats. The wind gusted. The mirage shifted. The target seemed to dance left. She did not chase it. Chasing the wind was how amateurs missed. Instead, she waited. The wind was not random. Nothing in nature was truly random. Wind moved in patterns, in waves, in cycles that could be read if you knew the language. The gust died. The mirage settled. The target stood still. She pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar violence. The sound was enormous, a physical force that punched the air and sent shockwaves rolling across the range. Downrange, through the scope, she watched the bullets trace in the shimmer of disturbed air. 2.1 seconds of flight time. In those 2.1 seconds, the bullet traveled 3,000 feet, dropped 41 inches from the force of gravity, drifted 6 inches right from the spin of the Earth, and fought a 22-mile-per-hour wind that tried to push it left. The bullet found the target's center mass. Behind her, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Walsh lowered his spotting scope. At 62 years old, Walsh was the oldest active duty instructor at Quantico, and the only man in the Scout Sniper program who had trained in the same era as Sarah's grandfather. His face was a roadmap of sun damage and old shrapnel scars, and his hands shook slightly from the nerve damage he had collected in conflicts that still carried classification stamps. He did not smile. Walsh never smiled, but his voice carried something that might have been approval. Perfect shot, Garrett. Center mass. Wind call was textbook. Sarah cleared her weapon and stood, slinging the rifle across her back. The weight was comforting. 19 pounds of steel and wood and glass that had become an extension of her body over the last 90 days. Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. Walsh walked toward her with the slow, careful gait of a man whose knees had given out twice and been rebuilt with pins and prayers. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak without the other instructors hearing, far enough to maintain the professional distance that the Marine Corps demanded. Your grandfather would be proud, kid. The words hit harder than Sarah expected. She had not cried when they found his remains 2 years ago in the rubble of the demolished prison. Had not cried at the funeral at Arlington when they played taps and folded the flag. Had not cried during the 9 months of bureaucratic nightmare as the Marine Corps tried to decide whether a man who died in enemy captivity deserved full honors. But something about Walsh saying those words here on this range made her throat tight. Did you know him, Gunnery Sergeant? Walsh's eyes went distant, looking at something 49 years in the past. Boot camp, 1968. Your grandfather was my drill instructor. Hardest man I ever met. Fair but hard. He taught me that being a Marine was not about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about being the one who would not quit when quitting made sense. He paused, and for a moment Sarah thought that was all he would say. Then he continued, his voice quieter. He also taught me that the real war is not on the battlefield. The real war is the one you fight to come home whole. He won every battle overseas, Garrett. Every single one. But he lost the war to come home. Sarah understood what Walsh was not saying. Her grandfather had spent 13 years in captivity after his aircraft was shot down over territory the United States never officially acknowledged operating in. 13 years in a prison that existed in the gaps between official records and plausible deniability. When the Cold War ended and records began to surface, his name had not been on any of the repatriation lists. The United States government filed him as MIA, then after 7 years as KIA presumed. His wife, Sarah's grandmother, had died in 1992, still not knowing if her husband was alive or dead. It was not until 2019, when a construction crew demolished an old Soviet-era facility to build a hotel, that they found the remains. Dental records confirmed what Sarah's mother had known in her heart for 47 years. He never came home. Walsh handed her a manila envelope, official-looking with red stamps across the top that read, "Confidential" in bold letters. Your orders came in this morning. I was told to give them to you after the final qualification shoot. Sarah took the envelope. The paper was crisp and new, and when she opened it, the smell of fresh ink filled her nose. The document inside was brief, 2 pages, standard military format with too many acronyms and not enough information. The relevant section was in the third paragraph. Staff Sergeant Sarah M. Garrett is hereby ordered to report to Marine Special Operations Command, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, for immediate deployment with Marine Special Operations Team 3, Operation Allies Refuge, Afghanistan Theater. Sarah read it twice to make sure she understood. Afghanistan, the war that had been grinding on for 20 years, longer than she had been alive. The war that was supposed to have ended last year but refused to die. The war that was now in its final chaotic death throes as the Taliban swept back across a country that had cost America 2,300 lives and $2 trillion. Operation Allies Refuge. She knew what that meant. Evacuation. The kind of desperate last-minute scramble that happened when a war was lost and all that remained was getting people out before the victors came to settle scores. Walsh was watching her face. You ship out in 48 hours. I pulled some strings to get you an extra day with your family. Sarah folded the orders and slipped them back into the envelope. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. Everything about her was steady except the small part of her mind that was already running calculations on altitude and wind patterns in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. I appreciate the consideration. Walsh nodded. Then he did something that surprised her. He extended his hand. Sarah shook it. His grip was firm despite the nerve damage, and his eyes held hers. Come back whole, Garrett. The real war is not over there. It is in here. He tapped his chest over his heart. Do not lose that fight. Then he turned and walked back toward the range tower, leaving Sarah alone on the firing line with the wind and the targets and the weight of orders that would send her to the other side of the world. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. Through the paper, she could feel the shape of her future. Deployment, combat, Afghanistan. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a memory stirred, her grandfather's voice, from the one recording her mother had saved, a cassette tape from 1971, before the crash, before the prison, before everything went wrong. The recording had been a birthday message for Sarah's mother. But at the end, after the singing and the jokes, her grandfather's voice had turned serious. If something happens to me, if I do not make it back, I need you to know something. There are places in this world where the truth gets buried. Not because people want to hide it, but because revealing it would cost more than the truth is worth. If you ever find those places, you have to decide. Do you dig it up and pay the price? Or do you let it stay buried and live with not knowing? Sarah had been 16 when she first heard that recording. She had not understood it then. Standing on the range at Quantico with deployment orders in her hand and her grandfather's rifle across her back, she was starting to understand. The flight to Camp Lejeune took 3 hours, enough time for Sarah to read the mission brief twice and memorize the terrain maps. Marine Special Operations Team 3 was a direct action unit, 12 operators with specializations ranging from communications to demolitions. Their current mission was extraction, simple on paper, deadly in execution. The Taliban had swept across Afghanistan faster than anyone predicted. Provincial capitals that were supposed to hold for months had fallen in days. The Afghan National Army, trained and equipped by 20 years of American advisors, had evaporated like morning dew under the August sun. What remained were pockets of American citizens, aid workers, journalists, and the Afghan translators and support personnel who had worked with the coalition forces. These people were now trapped behind rapidly advancing Taliban lines, and their life expectancy was being measured in hours. Team 3's job was to go get them. Camp Lejeune appeared through the window of the C-130 transport plane, a sprawl of buildings and training grounds that covered more than 200 square miles of North Carolina coast. The plane landed hard. The kind of landing that reminded everyone on board that military pilots were trained for combat, not comfort. Sarah grabbed her gear and followed the flow of Marines toward the hangar that served as the Special Operations Command headquarters. The building was deliberately unmarked, just another hangar among dozens, but everyone on base knew what happened inside. The briefing room was cold, air-conditioned to the point of discomfort, and filled with men who looked like they had been carved from the same block of granite. They stood in small clusters, talking in low voices, checking weapons and equipment with the casual efficiency of people who had done this so many times it had become muscle memory. Sarah entered the room and felt 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The conversation did not stop, but it changed, became quieter, more careful. She found an empty chair against the wall and sat down, setting her rifle case beside her. The M40A6 was her personal weapon, not issued, purchased with her own money and customized to her exact specifications. The scope alone had cost 3 months of salary. A voice cut through the murmur of conversation, loud and carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of command. Listen up. We have movement in 30 minutes. If you are not on the bird, you are not on the mission. Sarah looked up and saw the man who would be her commanding officer for however long this deployment lasted. Major Tom Brennan stood at the front of the room like an old oak tree that had survived too many storms to count, but refused to fall. At 58 years old, he should have been retired, should have been sitting on a porch somewhere telling war stories to grandchildren. Instead, he was still in uniform, still in the fight, still carrying the weight of command like a cross he could not put down. He was tall, 6'4", with shoulders that had carried rucksacks and wounded men in the coffins of friends for 35 years. His hair was gray, cropped close to his skull in the high and tight that had gone out of fashion 2 decades ago, but that he refused to abandon. His face was lined deep, each wrinkle a mile marker on the long road he had walked from boot camp to this moment. But it was his eyes that Sarah noticed. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much and was still looking for more. Not because he wanted to, but because he could not look away. Brennan's gaze swept the room and stopped on Sarah. For a long moment he just stared, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice flat and cold. Garrett, front and center. Sarah stood and walked to the front of the room. Every operator in the building was watching now, the conversation dead, the air thick with the kind of tension that comes before something breaks. Brennan looked down at her. The height difference was absurd, almost comical. He towered over her by 15 inches. His body weight was probably double hers. Standing next to him, Sarah looked like a child next to her father. Brennan did not see a fellow Marine. He saw a problem. You are the sniper. His tone made it clear this was not a question. Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Sarah Garrett, Scout Sniper qualified as of 0700 this morning. Brennan's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. I requested an experienced operator, someone with at least 1 combat deployment, someone who knows what it is like when the bullets start flying and the plan falls apart. Command sent me a staff sergeant who graduated from sniper school this morning. He paused and Sarah knew what was coming next. She had heard variations of this speech her entire career. I do not care what your qualification scores are, Garrett. I do not care if you can shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 yards. This is not a training exercise. This is a combat evacuation in a country that is collapsing around us. People are going to die. Maybe a lot of people. And I will not have their blood on my hands because I was babysitting a diversity hire who was not ready. The words hung in the air like smoke from a grenade. Sarah kept her face neutral, her voice calm. Sir, I understand your concern. I am aware that I have not been deployed before, but I qualified expert on every course of fire. My scores place me in the top 1% of Marine snipers, and I am here because someone at command decided I could do the job. I will not let the team down. Brennan's expression did not change. Words are easy, Garrett. Anyone can sound confident in a briefing room. The question is what you do when you are alone on a mountain with Taliban fighters trying to put a bullet through your skull. Will you freeze? Will you panic? Will you get someone killed because you were not ready for the reality of combat? Sarah met his eyes and did not look away. Sir, my grandfather spent 13 years in a Soviet prison. He survived torture, starvation, and isolation that would have broken most men. When they finally found his remains, there was a message carved into the wall of his cell. Do you know what it said? Brennan said nothing, but his eyes narrowed slightly. It said grid coordinates and 3 words. Tell Sarah everything. He knew he was dying, knew no one would find that message for decades. But he still left it because he believed that someday someone would care enough to look. I am here because I am my grandfather's granddaughter. And if there is one thing he taught me, it is that you do not quit when things get hard. You get harder. For a long moment, Brennan just stared at her. Then he turned away and addressed the room. Wheels up in 25 minutes. Garrett, you are in the trail position. Stay behind the team, watch our 6, and stay out of the way unless we call for fire support. If you cannot keep up with the pace, you get left behind. We do not carry passengers. Clear? Crystal, sir. Dismissed. The operators filed out toward the flight line where two MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters waited with rotors already turning. Sarah grabbed her gear and followed, feeling the weight of Brennan's doubt like a stone in her gut. Outside, the North Carolina heat hit like a physical force after the air-conditioned briefing room. The sun was high and brutal, and the tarmac radiated waves of heat that made the air shimmer and dance. One of the operators fell into step beside her. He was younger than Brennan, but still older than Sarah by at least 15 years, with the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments in too many deserts. His name tape read Martinez. "Do not take it personally," he said, his voice low enough that only Sarah could hear. "The major is like that with everyone. He has been doing this since before you were born. He has seen a lot of people die because they were not ready." Sarah adjusted the weight of her pack. "I appreciate the context, but I am ready." Martinez smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Everyone thinks they are ready until the first time someone shoots at them. Then you find out what you are really made of." He picked up his pace and moved ahead, leaving Sarah to walk alone toward the helicopter that would carry her across the world to a war that was ending in the worst possible way. The interior of the Black Hawk was cramped and loud and smelled like hydraulic fluid and old sweat. Sarah found a seat along the wall and strapped in, the 5-point harness tight across her chest. Around her, the operators conducted final equipment checks with practiced efficiency. Across from her sat a man who looked like he had been assembled from spare parts of bigger men. His name tape read Davis, and his rank was Master Gunnery Sergeant, the kind of senior enlisted position that took 20-plus years to achieve. He was 56 years old according to the mission roster, and every one of those years showed in the gray of his beard and the scars that covered his knuckles. Davis was checking his M4 rifle for what Sarah guessed was the 10th time, his hands moving through the motions with the unconscious grace of muscle memory built over decades. When he looked up and caught Sarah watching, he did not look away. "First deployment?" "Yes, Master Guns." Davis nodded slowly, like he had expected that answer. "You scared?" Sarah considered lying, decided against it. "Yes, Master Guns. I would be stupid not to be." That got something that might have been approval from Davis. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It is the ones who are not scared that get killed first. They think they are invincible right up until a bullet proves them wrong." He went back to checking his rifle, and Sarah thought the conversation was over. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "I knew your grandfather. Not well, but I knew him. He gave a class on prisoner survival at Camp Pendleton back in '89, couple years before he was officially declared dead. Your grandmother asked him to do it, said it would help him process. I was a corporal back then, fresh off my first deployment. I remember him telling us that the worst part about being a prisoner was not the physical pain or the hunger. It was the knowing that people back home had probably given up on you, that you had been forgotten." Davis looked up again, and his eyes were sharp. "Your grandfather was wrong about that. He was not forgotten. Every Marine who heard that story remembered him. And now his granddaughter is sitting in this bird and about to deploy to a combat zone. He would be proud. He would also tell you the same thing he told us that day. The mission matters, but it is not worth dying for if you have a choice. Come home, Garrett. However you have to, just come home." The helicopter engines spooled up to full power, and the airframe began to vibrate with the kind of deep bone-rattling frequency that made conversation impossible. Sarah settled back in her seat and closed her eyes, letting the noise wash over her. In her mind, she saw her grandfather's message again. The coordinates, the words. Tell Sarah everything. She had researched those coordinates. 35 degrees, 20 minutes north. 69 degrees, 30 minutes east. Panjshir Valley, Afghanistan. The same place Team 3 was heading. Sarah did not believe in coincidences. Not anymore. Whatever her grandfather had wanted her to know, whatever truth he had tried to leave behind in that prison cell 49 years ago, she was about to find out. The helicopter banked hard, and through the open door, Sarah caught her last glimpse of American soil for what might be a very long time. Then the coast fell away, and there was nothing but ocean and sky and the long flight across the world toward a war that had been waiting for her since before she was born. In the cockpit, the pilot adjusted course for the refueling stop in Germany. In the passenger bay, 12 operators sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what waited on the other side of this flight. And in the trail seat, strapped in tight with her grandfather's rifle between her knees, Sarah Garrett closed her eyes and whispered a prayer her grandmother had taught her as a child. Lord, make me fast and accurate. Let my aim be true and my heart be stronger than my fear. And if today is my day to die, let me take the enemy with me. Then she opened her eyes and watched the sky turn dark as they flew east into the night. The Chinook helicopter descended through air so thin it felt like breathing through a straw. At 9,000 feet above sea level, every breath was a negotiation with physics, and physics was winning. Sarah Garrett's lungs burned as she sucked in oxygen that did not quite satisfy, her body screaming for the sea-level air it had evolved to process. Through the open rear ramp of the helicopter, Afghanistan appeared as a nightmare rendered in stone and shadow. The Hindu Kush mountains rose like the broken teeth of some ancient god, peaks so sharp they seemed designed to tear holes in the sky. Snow-capped summits glowed pale in the pre-dawn darkness, but the valleys below were still drowned in night, black and bottomless as graves. The loadmaster's voice crackled through Sarah's headset. 2 minutes to insertion. Check your gear. Around her, the 12 operators of Marine Special Operations Team 3 moved with the synchronized efficiency of men who had done this dance in a dozen different countries. Weapons were checked. Night vision devices were activated. Body armor was adjusted one final time. Sarah ran through her own checklist, hands moving on autopilot while her mind processed the terrain below. The M40A6 rifle was secure across her chest, barrel down, scope protected. Her sidearm, a Marine Corps issue M45A1 pistol, rode in a drop leg holster on her right thigh. Spare magazines lined her plate carrier in pouches positioned exactly where muscle memory could find them in the dark. The weight of it all was crushing. 73 pounds of gear distributed across a frame that weighed 110 pounds without it. In training, she had carried this load for 20-mile movements. In training, the terrain had been forgiving and the consequences theoretical. This was not training. Major Brennan moved down the line of operators, checking each man with the critical eye of someone who knew that a loose strap or an unsecured magazine could mean the difference between mission success and a body bag. When he reached Sarah, he stopped. His eyes scanned her gear, looking for the mistake he expected to find. Finding nothing, he moved closer, speaking directly into her ears so the words would not be lost in the roar of the rotors. You stay in the trail position, last in the file. If contact is made, you find cover and wait for orders. Do not try to be a hero. Do not try to prove anything. Just stay alive and stay out of the way, understood? Sarah met his eyes and saw something there that surprised her. It was not contempt or dismissal. It was fear. Not fear of the enemy or the mission, but fear for her. The kind of fear a father might have sending his daughter into danger. Understood, sir. Brennan held her gaze for another second, then moved on to check the next operator. The Chinook flared hard, the nose pulling up as the pilots fought to arrest their descent. The landing gear touched down on ground that was more rock than soil, and the impact sent a shockwave through the airframe that rattled teeth and reminded everyone on board that helicopters were fundamentally unnatural machines held aloft by pure stubbornness. Go, go, go! The operators flowed off the ramp in a choreographed rush, each man moving to his assigned position in the security perimeter. Sarah was last off, her boots hitting Afghan soil for the first time at 0400 hours local time. The helicopter departed immediately, rotors clawing at the thin air as it climbed back towards safety. The sound of the engines faded quickly, swallowed by the vast silence of the mountains. Sarah had expected Afghanistan to be hot. Everyone talked about the heat, the way it turned body armor into a slow cooking oven, the way it made every movement feel like wading through soup. But at 9,000 feet in late August, the pre-dawn temperature hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Her breath came out in visible clouds, and the cold cut through her uniform like a knife looking for skin. Brennan's voice came through the radio, barely a whisper. File formation. Spacing 10 meters, weapons tight, we move silent. The team began to move, a line of shadows flowing across terrain that had been killing outsiders for 3,000 years. The Panjshir Valley had broken Alexander the Great's army. It had bled the British Empire white in 3 separate wars. It had chewed up Soviet divisions and spit out the bones. Now it waited to see what it could do to 12 Americans and one very small woman who had no business being here. Sarah fell into position at the rear of the file, her eyes constantly moving, scanning the darkness for threats that her night vision device turned into shades of green. The NVDs gave her vision in the darkness, but they stole depth perception and turned the world into a flat plane where distances were lies and shadows could hide anything. The pace Brennan set was brutal, 3.5 miles per hour across terrain that fought every step. Loose scree shifted underfoot, threatening to turn ankles or send rocks cascading down slopes to alert every enemy within earshot. Narrow trails carved into cliff faces forced them to move single file, inches from drops that would turn a misstep into a body that would not be recovered for months. Sarah's legs burned within the first hour. Her lungs screamed for air that was not there. The weight of her gear seemed to double with every step, the straps of her pack cutting into shoulders that had thought they were ready for this. She did not ask for a break, did not slow down, did not give Brennan the satisfaction of being right about her. 2 hours into the movement, Master Gunnery Sergeant Davis dropped back from his position in the file and fell into step beside her. At 56 years old, he should have been struggling with the altitude and the pace. Instead, he moved like a man taking a morning stroll, his breathing steady and controlled. "How you holding up, Garrett?" Sarah wanted to lie, wanted to say she was fine, wanted to project the confidence that would prove she belonged here. But Davis had been doing this since before she was born, and he would see through the lie before it left her mouth. "Truthfully, Master Guns, I feel like my legs are going to fall off and my lungs are trying to escape through my throat." Davis nodded, and something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Good. That means you are still human. The day you do not feel it is the day you have done this too many times." He pulled a small packet from his cargo pocket and handed it to her. Electrolyte powder, the kind that mixed with water to replace what sweat was stealing from the body. "Drink half your water now. You are dehydrating faster than you think at this altitude. If you pass out, someone has to carry you, and that puts everyone at risk." Sarah took the packet and mixed it with water from her camelback, the powder dissolving into a solution that tasted like artificial fruit and chemicals. It was disgusting. It was also exactly what her body needed. "Thank you, Master Guns." Davis adjusted his rifle and prepared to move back to his position in the file. Then he paused. "Your grandfather's message, the coordinates, you know they match exactly where we are going?" Sarah had suspected Davis knew. The man had been in special operations for 30 years. Nothing got past him. "Yes, Master Guns, I know. And you understand that might not be a coincidence?" Sarah looked at the older Marine, trying to read his expression through the green glow of night vision. "What do you know about it?" Davis was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could hear the sound of his breathing, steady and controlled despite the altitude and the pace. "I know that during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the KGB ran operations throughout this valley. They used local facilities to hold captured mujahideen, but they also held other prisoners, people who were not supposed to exist. American servicemen who got transferred from other conflicts, Soviet officers who knew too much, anyone who was politically inconvenient." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was harder. "I know that the Panjshir Valley was a Soviet stronghold during their war here. I know that the CIA ran all kinds of operations in this area during the 80s, working with the resistance, and that some of those operations involve things that will never be declassified. And I know that coincidences are rare in this business." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the altitude. "You think my grandfather was here, in Afghanistan? I think your grandfather left you coordinates for a reason, and I think you are about to find out what that reason was." Before Sarah could respond, Brennan's voice cut through the radio. "Hold position. I have movement ahead." The file froze, every operator dropping into whatever cover the terrain offered. Sarah pressed herself against a boulder, her rifle coming up to her shoulder, her breathing slowing as training took over from exhaustion. Through her night vision, she could see Brennan at the front of the column, one fist raised in the signal for halt. He was looking at something ahead, something Sarah could not see from her position. 30 seconds of silence stretched into a minute, then 2 minutes. The cold of the rock began to seep through Sarah's uniform, and her legs started to cramp from holding position. Then Brennan's voice again, quieter this time. "Wreckage ahead. Soviet era. Moving to investigate." The file began to move again, slower now, weapons raised and ready. Sarah followed, her heart rate climbing as curiosity mixed with tactical awareness. The wreckage revealed itself in pieces as they approached. First, a rotor blade, bent and half buried in soil that had not been disturbed in decades. then part of a tail boom, the red star of the Soviet Air Force still visible beneath layers of rust and bullet holes. Finally, the main body of the aircraft, a Me-24 Hind attack helicopter that had been the nightmare of resistance fighters across Afghanistan in the 1980s. This particular Hind had not died peacefully. The windscreen was shattered. The armor plating was pocked with impacts from heavy machine gun fire. One of the rocket pods had cooked off at some point, leaving a blast pattern on the fuselage that spoke to a violent end. Brennan approached the wreck carefully, his rifle up and scanning for threats that were 36 years dead. Sarah hung back with the rest of the team, but her eyes were locked on the helicopter. Something about it felt wrong, not wrong in the sense of tactical danger, but wrong in a way that made her skin crawl and her grandfather's message echo in her mind. Grid coordinates: 35 degrees, 20 minutes north, 69 degrees, 30 minutes east. She pulled out her GPS device and checked their current position. 35 degrees, 20 minutes, 12 seconds north, 69 degrees, 30 minutes, 8 seconds east. Margin of error with 1970s era navigation equipment would be well within that tolerance. This was the place. This was what her grandfather had wanted her to find. Brennan was inside the wreck now, using a flashlight to illuminate the interior. His voice came through the radio, tight and controlled. "We have remains. 4 skeletons. Soviet uniforms." This bird went down hard. Sarah moved closer, drawn by a compulsion she could not name. As she approached the wreckage, she could see what Brennan was seeing. 4 skulls, still wearing the flight helmets of Soviet aviators. Bones scattered across seats that had rotted away to metal frames. Dog tags hanging from vertebrae. But it was what else was in the helicopter that made Sarah's blood run cold. Mounted behind the pilot seats, secured with American-made tie-down straps, was a radio system that had never been part of Soviet equipment. The housing was weathered, the components corroded, but Sarah recognized the configuration. AN/PRC-77, American military radio from the Cold War era. Her hand moved without conscious thought, reaching for one of the dog tags that hung from the nearest skeleton. The metal was corroded, the stamping nearly worn smooth, but she could still make out the Cyrillic letters. Lieutenant Yuri Volkov, born 1956, KGB. Brennan was beside her now, his flashlight adding to the illumination inside the wreck. "What is American radio equipment doing in a Soviet helicopter?" Garrett. Sarah turned the dog tag over, and on the back, scratched into the metal with something sharp, were numbers. Not serial numbers or identification codes. GPS coordinates. The same coordinates her grandfather had left carved into a prison wall halfway around the world. She looked at Brennan, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Sir, I need to tell you something about my grandfather." Brennan listened in silence as Sarah explained. The message in the prison cell, the coordinates, the cassette tape warning about buried truths. When she finished, Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he keyed his radio. "Team 3, hold position. Establish security perimeter. I need 5 minutes." He pulled Sarah away from the wreck, far enough that the other operators could not hear. 20 years ago, when I was a captain running operations in Iraq, I got tasked to escort a CIA officer to a meeting with an Iraqi general who was supposed to be cooperating with the coalition forces. The meeting was in a house outside Fallujah. When we got there, the general was dead, executed, and the CIA officer told me that some truths are too expensive to reveal, and that my job was to forget I had ever been there. Brennan paused, his eyes distant. I spent the next 15 years trying to figure out what that meant. Eventually, I learned that during the Cold War, both sides did things that were never meant to see daylight. Prisoner exchanges that never happened officially, black site facilities that did not exist on any map, operations that violated every treaty ever written. He gestured back toward the wreck. This helicopter was not shot down in combat. Look at the bullet impacts. They all came from the ground, from behind, when it was already low and slow. Someone executed this crew, and if there is American equipment on board, it means someone was trying to get out and someone else did not want them to. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together in her mind, forming a picture that made her sick. My grandfather was here. He was a prisoner, and he tried to escape using this helicopter. Brennan nodded slowly. That would be my guess. The question is, did he make it? Sarah thought about the message, the coordinates, the final words. Tell Sarah everything. If he made it, he would not have left those coordinates. He would have told the story himself, which means he failed. He got out of one prison and ended up in another. The radio crackled, and a new voice broke through, not one of Team 3, but someone from higher command. Badger 6, this is Overwatch. Be advised, intelligence update. Taliban forces are moving into your area faster than predicted. You have multiple columns converging on the Panjshir Valley. Estimate 30 to 40 fighters with heavy weapons. Recommend you expedite to the objective and prepare for possible contact. Brennan's jaw tightened. He looked at Sarah, then back at the wreck, then at the mountains around them that were slowly revealing themselves as dawn approached. We do not have time for this. We have a mission. 340 Afghan allies trapped in a compound 15 clicks from here. If we do not get them out in the next 12 hours, the Taliban will execute every one of them. Sarah understood what he was not saying. Her grandfather's story would have to wait. The dead had been waiting 36 years. They could wait a few more hours. Understood, sir. Brennan started to turn away, then stopped. When this is over, if we are still breathing, we come back here. We figure out what happened. We get answers. I owe that to your grandfather. I owe it to every Marine who never made it home. Thank you, sir. The team moved out, leaving the wreck behind. But as Sarah took one last look at the crashed helicopter, she saw something that made her stop. In the dirt beside the aircraft, partially buried by decades of sand and erosion, was a boot print. Not an old print worn smooth by time, but a fresh print, recent enough that the edges were still sharp. Someone had been here, recently. Sarah keyed her radio, about to report it, but something stopped her. Instinct maybe, or paranoia, or the same sense that had kept her grandfather alive for 13 years in a prison camp. If someone had been here recently, and if that someone was connected to whatever secret this wreck represented, then reporting it over the radio might not be the smartest move. Not until she knew who was listening. She took a photo with her rifle-mounted camera, marked the GPS coordinates in her personal log, and moved on. The sun rose over the Hindu Kush like a judgment, harsh and unforgiving. The temperature began to climb immediately, the thin air doing nothing to filter the radiation that turned the landscape into a furnace. Within an hour, the pleasant cold of pre-dawn had become a memory, replaced by heat that made Sarah's body armor feel like a convection oven. The trail they followed wound through a canyon so narrow that in places the operators had to turn sideways to fit through with their gear. The walls rose 300 feet on either side, sheer rock face that would be impossible to climb. It was a perfect kill zone, the kind of terrain that made every tactical fiber in Sarah's body scream warnings. Brennan felt it too. She could see it in the way he moved, more cautious now, hand signals more frequent, head on a swivel, scanning the high ground. They were halfway through the canyon when the radio crackled again. Badger 6, Overwatch. Drone feed shows heat signatures on the ridgeline above your position. Count approximately 15 to 20 individuals. They appear to be setting up defensive positions. Brennan's response was immediate and calm, the voice of a man who had been in bad situations before and knew that panic was a luxury he could not afford. Overwatch, can you confirm hostile intent? Negative, Badger 6. Too much distance for positive ID, but their positioning is consistent with ambush preparation. Brennan stopped the column, hand up in the signal for halt. He turned to face his team, and Sarah could see him running calculations in his head. 15 to 20 enemies on the high ground. 12 Marines in a narrow canyon with limited cover and no room to maneuver. The math was bad. We pushed through, Brennan said, his voice carrying just far enough for the team to hear. Double time. If they hit us, we do not stop to fight. We run for the far end and find cover to consolidate. Fighting here gets us all killed. The operators nodded, understanding the plan. It was not elegant, but elegance was for training exercises. This was survival. They began to move faster, the spacing between operators tightening as speed became more important than dispersal. Sarah's legs, already burning from hours of movement, found reserves of energy driven by pure adrenaline. The canyon seemed to stretch forever, each turn revealing another 100 meters of narrow passage, more high ground, more places for an enemy to have every advantage. They were 3/4 of the way through when the first shot rang out. The sound was enormous in the confined space, echoing off the rock walls and seeming to come from everywhere at once. Sarah's training took over before her conscious mind could process what was happening. She was moving, sprinting, her rifle clutched tight against her chest as bullets began to crack through the air around her. The ambush was textbook perfect. Automatic weapons fire from multiple positions on both sides of the canyon, overlapping fields of fire that turned the trail into a shooting gallery. Rock chips exploded as bullets impacted stone, sending shrapnel spinning through the air like fragments from grenades. Ahead of her, Sarah saw one of the operators go down, a spray of red mist marking where a bullet had found the gap between his helmet and his body armor. He was dead before he hit the ground. Contact right, contact left. We are in a kill box. Brennan's voice cut through the chaos, still controlled, still thinking. Smoke out, push through, do not stop. Smoky grenades arced through the air, landing in the narrow confines of the canyon and beginning to pour out thick white clouds that mixed with dust and created a fog of war that was both concealment and confusion. Sarah ran through the smoke, her world reduced to the back of the operator in front of her and the sound of bullets searching for her flesh. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, her mind detached from her body and became pure survival instinct. Someone grabbed her arm, yanking her sideways into a crack in the rock wall. She stumbled, nearly fell, caught herself, and turned to see Davis pulling two more operators into the same minimal cover. The firing continued, a sustained roar of automatic weapons that seemed designed to turn the canyon into a meat grinder. Through gaps in the smoke, Sarah caught glimpses of the enemy. Taliban fighters in mixed civilian clothes and military gear, firing from positions that had clearly been prepared in advance. This was not a chance encounter. This was planned. Someone knew they were coming. Brennan's voice again, strained now but still functional. Martinez is hit. Doc is working him. We need to break contact now or we do not break contact at all. Sarah looked at Davis, saw the calculation in his eyes. They were pinned down with limited ammunition, limited cover, and an enemy that had every advantage. Then Davis did something that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a liability or a diversity hire or a problem to be managed. He saw a Marine. He saw a sniper. Garrett, he said, his voice cutting through the gunfire. How far to that ridge? Sarah's mind, trained to calculate distances and angles and trajectories, processed the question automatically. 4,100 meters, give or take 50. Can you make that shot? Sarah thought about the M40A6 rifle strapped to her back. Thought about the wind howling through the canyon, the elevation difference, the chaos and the fear, and the impossibility of it all. Not from here. I need high ground. I need clear line of sight. Davis pointed up at the canyon wall, at a narrow ledge maybe 200 feet above them. That ledge runs for half a click, gets you above the smoke, above the noise, gives you the angle you need. Sarah looked at the wall. It was not quite vertical, but it was close. Climbing it with full gear under fire was insane. I will never make that climb with this pack. Davis was already pulling at the straps of her pack, dumping everything that was not essential. Water, rations, extra ammunition, survival gear. All of it hit the ground in a pile. Just your rifle, sidearm, and 100 rounds. Move fast, move quiet. Get to that ledge and start putting rounds down range. Make them think there are 10 of you up there. Sarah shrugged out of the remains of her pack, feeling suddenly light and vulnerable. Davis pressed something into her hand, a small radio separate from the team's tactical net. Direct channel to me. When you are in position, you call targets. I will relay to the major. He met her eyes and Sarah saw something there she had not expected. Trust. You can do this, Garrett? Your grandfather survived 13 years in hell. You can survive one climb. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to work. She slung her rifle, checked that her pistol was secure, and turned to face the wall. The first handhold was 15 feet up. She jumped, caught it with fingers that immediately screamed protest. Her boots scrabbled against rock, finding purchase on irregularities that might have been natural or might have been carved by travelers 1,000 years ago. She climbed. Bullets continued to crack through the air below her, but up here, pressed against the rock face, she was a smaller target, harder to see, harder to hit. Her fingers bled, her shoulders burned. The rifle on her back seemed to gain weight with every foot of elevation, pulling her backward, threatening to peel her off the wall and send her tumbling to the rocks below. She did not fall. At 100 feet, her right-hand grip failed, fingers too slick with blood to hold. She dropped 6 inches before her left hand caught, tendons screaming as they took her full weight. For a heartbeat, she hung by one hand, feet swinging free, looking down at a fall that would kill her as surely as any bullet. Then her feet found stone, and she was climbing again. At 150 feet, the ledge appeared above her. 10 more feet, then 5. Her hand closed on the edge of the ledge, and she pulled herself up and over, rolling onto flat rock and gasping for air that her lungs could not quite process. For 10 seconds, she let herself be human, let herself feel the pain and the fear and the exhaustion. Then she became a Marine again. Sarah unslung her rifle and moved to the edge of the ledge. Below, the canyon was chaos. Above, across the divide, the enemy positions were clear. She activated the radio Davis had given her. "Overwatch in position, I have targets." Davis's response was immediate. "Send it, Raven, make them hurt." Sarah settled into her rifle, found her breathing, and began the mathematics of death. Range to nearest target, 4,100 meters. Wind, 25 miles per hour, gusting to 40. Elevation, Sarah was 200 feet higher than her target. Temperature, 95 degrees and rising. She dialed the corrections into her scope, her hands steady despite everything that had just happened. Through the magnified circle of her optic, she could see a Taliban fighter setting up a mortar tube. If that tube went operational, everyone in the canyon below would die. Sarah exhaled, found the space between heartbeats, squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, the bullet flew. 4.8 seconds later, the mortar operator's head snapped back, and he collapsed. Sarah cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent brass and chambering a fresh round. Target down, shifting, she fired again and again. And in the canyon below, 12 Marines who had been about to die suddenly had a guardian angel who stood 4 feet 11 inches tall and had the coldest hands in Afghanistan. The world through the rifle scope was a circle of truth in a universe of lies. Sarah Garrett pressed her eye against the glass and saw a reality compressed into 10-power magnification. A window that showed her things the human eye was never meant to see at this distance. 4,100 meters away, a man was dying and did not know it yet. He was Taliban, maybe 20 years old, wearing a mixture of traditional Afghan clothing and looted military gear. He crouched behind a boulder on the opposite ridgeline, feeding a belt of ammunition into a PKM machine gun that had been hammering Team 3's position for the last 2 minutes. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, and Sarah knew he had done this before, knew he was good at killing. She was about to be better. The mathematics of the shot assembled themselves in her mind with the cold precision of a computer running calculations. Range, 4,112 meters. Wind, 27 miles per hour, gusting to 42, coming from her 11 o'clock. Temperature, 96 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Barometric pressure, 24.6 inches of mercury, low because of the altitude. Humidity, 12%. The M40A6 rifle was designed for shots out to 1,000 meters, maybe 1,200 if the shooter was skilled and lucky. At 4,000 meters, she was asking the weapon to perform magic. She dialed corrections into the scope. Elevation, up 32 minutes of angle. Windage, left 18 minutes. The turrets clicked with mechanical precision, each click representing 1/4 minute of angle, each adjustment moving the point of impact by a fraction of an inch at this range. Sarah's breathing slowed, 4 seconds in through the nose. Hold for 2, 4 seconds out through the mouth. Her heart rate dropped from 120 beats per minute to 80, then to 60. The rifle rose and fell with the gentle rhythm of her chest. She waited for the wind to speak. At 4,000 meters, wind was not a single variable, but a landscape of currents and eddies and gusts that changed with every second. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 5 seconds, and during that time it would encounter different wind speeds at different altitudes, each one pushing it off course in ways that could only be estimated, never known. The wind in the canyon below was blowing east. The wind at Sarah's altitude was blowing northeast. The wind at the target's altitude was anyone's guess. She watched the mirage, the shimmer of heat rising off the rocks. The mirage was the sniper's oracle, reading the future in the dance of disturbed air. It boiled and twisted, showing her the invisible currents that would carry her bullet or dash it against stone. The PKM gunner finished loading his belt and prepared to fire again. In 5 seconds, he would send another 100 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition into the canyon where Marines were bleeding and dying. Sarah exhaled one final time and felt her heart pause between beats. She pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke with a voice like thunder compressed into a single syllable. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, 19 pounds of weapon trying to climb into the sky. Sarah wrote it, her body absorbing the impact, her eye never leaving the scope. The bullet left the barrel at 2,700 feet per second, spinning at 200,000 revolutions per minute, a copper-jacketed projectile that weighed exactly 175 grains and carried with it 4,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. 1 second into flight, the bullet was still supersonic, still climbing slightly as the trajectory fought against gravity. 2 seconds. Gravity was winning. The bullet reached the apex of its arc and began to fall. 3 seconds. The wind caught it, pushed it left, then right, then left again as competing currents fought over its trajectory. 4 seconds. The bullet dropped below the speed of sound with a crack that echoed across the valley. 4.8 seconds. The bullet found flesh. Through the scope, Sarah watched the PKM gunner's head snap sideways with violent force. A pink mist bloomed in the air behind him, and he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The machine gun fell silent. Sarah cycled the bolt of her rifle, the empty brass casing ejecting and tumbling through space to land on the rock ledge with a musical ping. She chambered a fresh round and scanned for the next target. Davis's voice came through the small radio, tight with controlled urgency. "Good kill, Raven. PKM is down. I have another gunner setting up. You're 2 o'clock, same ridgeline." Sarah shifted her aim, found the new target, a man with an RPG launcher, the distinctive tube already on his shoulder, aiming down into the canyon where the smoke was beginning to clear. If that rocket launched, it would find the narrow confines of the canyon and turn it into a killing jar. Overpressure alone would rupture organs. Shrapnel would do the rest. Range, 4,050 meters. Wind shifting. Sarah did not have time for a perfect shot. She had time for a fast shot. She aimed high and left, trusting instinct over calculation, and fired. The bullet flew. This time she missed. The round impacted 2 feet to the right of the RPG gunner, sparking off rock and sending fragments spinning through the air. The gunner flinched, startled by the near miss, but did not fall. He swung the RPG tube towards Sarah's position, searching for the source of the shots. Sarah was already working the bolt, already settling the crosshairs back on target. The gunner's face filled her scope, close enough that she could see his expression. He was young, maybe 18. He had a thin beard and eyes that were wide with the kind of fear that came from realizing someone was hunting you, and you could not see them. Sarah fired again. This time, the bullet found him, struck him in the chest just below the collarbone, and punched through him with enough force to spin his body completely around before he fell. The RPG clattered to the rocks, unfired. 2 down. But Sarah's position was compromised now. The sound of the M40A6 was distinctive, and even though she was 200 feet above the canyon floor and 4,000 meters from the enemy, eventually someone would figure out the geometry. She scanned the opposite ridgeline, looking for threats, looking for targets, looking for the mistake that would give away another enemy fighter. What she found instead was something that made her blood turn to ice water. On the far ridge, higher than the other fighters, partially concealed behind an outcropping of rock, was another sniper. He was positioned at what Sarah estimated was 14,000 feet of altitude, a full 500 feet higher than her position. His rifle was different from the AK-47s and PKMs the other fighters carried. Even at this distance, even through the shimmer of heat and the distortion of magnification, Sarah recognized the profile. Dragunov SVD Russian-made semi-automatic, designed for ranges out to 800 meters but lethal in the right hands at twice that distance. The rifle was pointed directly at her. Sarah threw herself sideways half a second before the shot arrived. The bullet cracked through the space where her head had been, so close she felt the pressure wave, and impacted the rock face behind her with a sound like a hammer striking an anvil. She scrambled for new cover, her heart hammering, her training screaming at her to move, keep moving, never stay still when someone has your range. Another shot, this one closer. Rock chips exploded inches from her left hand, and she felt something hot slice across her forearm. Blood welled up, not serious but enough to sting and remind her that she was mortal. The radio crackled. Davis again. "Raven, what is happening up there? We heard shots close to your position." Sarah pressed herself flat against the rock, making her profile as small as possible. Her mind was racing, processing threat and distance and angles. "I have counter-sniper fire. Enemy marksman on the high ridge, approximately 4,600 meters north-northwest of my position. He has my location. Can you take him?" Sarah risked a glance around the edge of her cover. The enemy sniper was still there, still hunting her. As she watched, he fired again, and the bullets sparked off rock 3 feet to her right. He was good, very good, too good to be Taliban. Negative, she transmitted. He has the high ground and better position. If I expose myself to take a shot, he will kill me. There was a pause, and Sarah could hear the sound of gunfire in the background of Davis's transmission. The firefight in the canyon was still raging. Then fall back. Get off that ledge and rejoin the team. Sarah looked down at the rock face she had climbed. 200 feet of near vertical stone that had taken her 15 minutes to ascend with adrenaline and desperation driving her. Going down would be slower, more exposed, and with a sniper watching, she would be an easy target for half the descent. She was trapped. The enemy sniper seemed to realize this at the same moment. His next shot did not come for her directly. Instead, it struck the rock face 10 feet below her position, right at a point where a massive crack ran through the stone. The impact sent vibrations through the ledge, and Sarah felt the rock shift beneath her. Not much, just a few millimeters, but enough to know what he was trying to do. He was going to collapse the ledge and drop her 200 feet onto the rocks below. Sarah keyed the radio, forcing her voice to stay calm. Master Guns, I need options. The enemy sniper is trying to bring down my position. I cannot climb down, and I cannot stay here. Davis's response was immediate. Can you identify the shooter? Sarah pulled out her rifle-mounted camera and zoomed in on the enemy position. The magnification brought the distant figure into sharp focus, and what she saw made her breath catch. The sniper was old, 60, maybe 65, with white hair visible beneath a Pakol hat. His face was weathered by decades of sun and wind, lined deep with the kind of scars that came from a hard life in hard country. But it was his eyes that struck her. Even at this distance, even through the camera lens, she could see them. They were the eyes of a professional, a hunter, a killer, and they were locked on her with the focus of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Sarah transmitted back to Davis. Negative ID on the shooter, but he is not local Taliban. This is a professional, foreign fighter, probably Russian or Chechen based on weapon choice. There was a long pause, then Davis's voice came back, and it carried a weight that Sarah had not heard before. Garrett, I need you to listen very carefully. During the Soviet war in Afghanistan, the KGB ran operations throughout this valley. They used local prisons to hold captured mujahideen, but they also held other prisoners, people who were not supposed to exist. American POWs who got transferred from other conflicts, Soviet officers who knew too much, anyone who was politically inconvenient. Sarah pressed tighter against the rock as another shot cracked past her position. Master Guns, I appreciate the history lesson, but I am kind of busy not dying right now. Davis continued as if she had not spoken. In 1985, there was an incident. A Soviet helicopter tried to leave this valley without authorization. It was shot down by KGB security forces. Everyone on board was killed. The official report said it was carrying defectors, but there were rumors it was carrying someone else. Someone the Soviets wanted dead and the Americans wanted to forget. The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind with the force of revelation. My grandfather, your grandfather and a KGB officer named Yuri Volkov. They tried to escape together. Both men died when the helicopter was destroyed. At least, that is what the official record says. Sarah thought about the fresh boot print she had seen beside the wreck. Thought about the coordinates her grandfather had left behind. Thought about the enemy sniper, who was far too skilled to be a simple Taliban fighter. Master Guns, what if the official record is wrong? What if someone survived that crash? Then we have a very big problem. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut into the radio frequency. It was not Davis or Brennan or anyone from Team 3. It was a voice she had never heard before, speaking English with a heavy Russian accent that had been smoothed by decades but never eliminated. Hello, little bird. I have been waiting for you. Sarah's finger moved to her transmit button, but the voice continued before she could speak. Do not bother to reply. This is a one-way conversation. I am using your tactical frequency because I want you to understand something very important. Your grandfather and my father died in that valley 36 years ago. They died because they were foolish enough to believe they could escape the choices they made. You are about to make the same mistake. Another shot rang out, this one striking so close to Sarah's position that rock dust showered down on her helmet. The voice continued, calm and measured. I have you ranged. I have you targeted. I can end you anytime I choose. But first, I want you to understand why. Your grandfather killed my father, shot him in the back as they tried to escape together, left him to bleed out in that helicopter while he tried to flee alone. For 36 years, I have waited for the opportunity to balance that debt. Sarah's mind was reeling. Everything Davis had just told her, everything she thought she knew about her grandfather's death, was being rewritten by a voice in her ear. "You are lying," she transmitted back. "My grandfather was not a murderer." The laugh that came back was cold and empty. "Your grandfather was a Marine, girl. Marines are trained killers. They simply get to call it duty instead of murder. But I do not judge him for what he did. I judge him for being weak enough to get caught. And I judge you for being foolish enough to follow in his footsteps." Brennan's voice cut into the frequency, hard and commanding. "Unknown station, this is Badger 6 Actual. You are interfering with military communications on a combat net. Identify yourself or clear this frequency." The Russian's voice held amusement now. "Major Brennan, 58 years old, Marine Corps, 35 years of service, due to retire in 6 months, son of a helicopter pilot who evacuated refugees from the American embassy in Saigon in 1975. You carry guilt because your father saved lives while you have spent your career taking them. You see this mission as redemption. But there is no redemption here, Major. Only blood and dust." "How do you know that?" "Because I know everything, Major. I have been watching this valley for 36 years. I have seen every American soldier who has come here thinking they could change something. They all leave in body bags or with ghosts in their heads. You will be no different." Sarah used the distraction to shift position, moving 5 feet to her left, where a small depression in the rock offered marginally better cover. As she moved, she caught a glint of light from the enemy sniper's position. Scope reflection. He had moved too, tracking her, adjusting his aim. She was running out of time. Davis's voice came through on the direct channel, bypassing the tactical net. "Raven, I have an idea, but you are not gonna like it." At this point, Master Guns, I am open to suggestions. That sniper has you pinned because he knows where you are, but he is also exposed on that ridgeline. If you can get him to focus on you, really commit to taking you out, he will have to expose himself fully to make the shot. Sarah understood immediately where this was going. "You want me to be bait? I want you to give him a target he cannot resist. Make him think he has a kill shot. When he commits, I will have a firing solution from down here." Sarah looked at the sheer drop below her position, at the rocks that would turn her body into a broken mess if she fell, at the enemy sniper who was already trying to kill her. "Master Guns, your position is 4,000 meters from that ridge at a 90-degree angle from my position. You would have to make a shot across the entire valley with no elevation advantage and wind speeds we cannot even calculate. I am aware of the difficulty. You have never made a shot over 3,000 meters in your life." There was a pause, and when Davis spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been humor. "First time for everything, Garrett. Besides, I learned from the best. Your grandfather taught a class on long-range shooting back in '89. I still have the notes." Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Not fear leaving, but fear being joined by something else. Trust, maybe. Or faith. She pulled her helmet off and set it on the rock beside her. Then she took her jacket, wadded it up, and stuffed it under the helmet to give it shape and bulk. "What is your plan, Raven?" Sarah positioned the helmet so it would be visible from the enemy sniper's position. Then she found a loose rock, about the size of her fist. "I am going to give him a target. When I do, he will have about 3 seconds to take the shot before he realizes it is fake. That is your window. 3 seconds, across 4,000 meters, with unknown wind. Like you said, Master Guns. First time for everything." Sarah counted down in her head. 3, 2, 1. She threw the rock. It arced up and out, tumbling through the air, and struck the helmet from behind. The helmet rocked forward, visible from the enemy position, looking for all the world like someone had just raised their head to scan for targets. The enemy sniper took the bait. Sarah heard the shot, heard the crack of the bullet passing, heard the impact as it struck her helmet and sent it spinning off the ledge to tumble down the cliff face. For one heartbeat, there was silence. Then Davis fired. Sarah could not see the shot from her position, could not see the bullet flying across 4,000 meters of empty air, fighting wind and gravity, and the simple, enormous distance between the muzzle and the target. What she could see was the result. The enemy sniper jerked backward, his rifle falling from his hands, and disappeared behind the rocks. Davis's voice came through the radio, calm and measured. Target down. I say again, target down. Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline and relief mixing into something that made her fingers tremble. Good shot, Master Guns. Lucky shot. Do not ask me to do that again. Sarah gathered her rifle and prepared to begin the descent from the ledge. But as she did, movement on the enemy ridge caught her eye. The sniper was not down. He was wounded, clutching his shoulder, but very much alive, and he was reaching for his rifle with his good hand. She brought her own rifle up, but the angle was wrong. He was behind cover now, only partially visible, and the shot would be nearly impossible. Through her scope, she saw him look directly at her. Even wounded, even bleeding, his eyes held no fear. Only a cold determination that sent a chill down her spine. Then he spoke, his voice coming through the radio one final time. This is not over, little bird. I am Eric Volkov, son of Yuri Volkov, and I will see you again before this is finished. Your grandfather's debt is not yet paid. The transmission cut off, and Sarah watched as the wounded sniper pulled himself behind the rocks and disappeared from view. She keyed her radio to Davis. Master Guns, the target is still mobile. Wounded but not dead. Can you pursue? Sarah looked at the terrain between her position and the enemy ridge. Miles of open ground, perfect killing fields for a wounded sniper who knew she was coming. Negative. By the time I get down from this ledge and cross that distance, he will be long gone. Then let him go. We have bigger problems. Sarah began her descent, moving carefully, knowing that a fall now after surviving everything else would be a particularly stupid way to die. The climb down took 20 minutes, each handhold a negotiation with gravity, each foothold a small victory. When she finally reached to the canyon floor, her legs were shaking and her arms felt like rubber. Davis was waiting for her. His rifle still smoking slightly from the shot that had saved her life. Thank you, Master Guns. Davis looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression had changed. The skepticism was gone. The doubt was gone. What remained was respect. You held that position under counter-sniper fire for 15 minutes, put 2 confirmed kills on enemy fighters at over 4,000 meters, and gave me a firing solution that should have been impossible. Your grandfather would have been proud. Before Sarah could respond, Brennan appeared around a boulder, moving fast. His face was grim and blood stained his uniform in several places, though Sarah could not tell if it was his or someone else's. We need to move now. Preacher is critical. Doc says he has maybe 30 minutes if we do not get him to a surgical facility. The LZ for medevac is 2 clicks north, but we have to cross open ground to reach it. Sarah fell into formation with the team, and for the first time, she noticed the casualties. Preacher was being carried on an improvised stretcher, his face pale and his breathing shallow. 2 other operators had field dressings wrapped around various wounds. The team that had started this mission with 12 men was down to 9 effectives, and even those 9 looked like they had been through a meat grinder. They moved as fast as the terrain allowed, Brennan setting a pace that was just short of running. The 2 clicks stretched like miles, each minute feeling like an hour as they raced against the clock ticking down in Preacher's chest. Halfway to the LZ, the radio crackled with a transmission from higher command. Badger 6, Overwatch. Be advised, we have intelligence indicating Taliban reinforcements moving into your area. Estimate 40-plus fighters, heavy weapons, ETA to your position, 30 minutes. Recommend immediate extraction. Brennan did not slow down. Overwatch, Badger 6. We are moving to LZ now. Request immediate medevac bird for critical casualty. There was a pause, longer than there should have been. Then a different voice came on, one Sarah had not heard before. It carried the kind of authority that made even Brennan stop moving. Badger 6, this is Guardian Actual. Medevac is denied. Air corridor over your position is too hot. Taliban have moved SA-7 man pads into the area. We cannot risk a bird until we confirm the threat is neutralized. Brennan's voice was ice cold. Guardian, we have a Marine bleeding out. If we do not get him out in the next 20 minutes, he dies. I need that medevac now. I understand your situation, Badger 6, but I cannot authorize a flight that will result in a downed aircraft and more casualties. You need to neutralize the air defense threat first. Once that is done, we can extract. Where is the threat located? Sarah watched Brennan's jaw tighten as the voice from Guardian Actual gave him coordinates. The SA-7 team is set up on Hill 873, approximately 3 clicks northwest of your current position. High ground with clear sight lines to the entire valley. Until that team is eliminated, nothing flies. Brennan looked at his team. 9 men, 3 wounded, 1 critical, against 40 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons and surface-to-air missiles. The math was impossible. Then Sarah spoke, her voice quiet but carrying. "Sir, I can make that shot." Every eye turned to her. Brennan's expression was unreadable. Hilayat 7-3 is 6,000 meters from the LZ. That is not a shot, Garrett. That is a prayer. Sarah pulled out her rangefinder and shot the distant hilltop. The readout confirmed what she already knew. 6,200 meters. Wind is favorable, coming from the southeast at 15 sustained. I have a clear line of sight from the high ground east of the LZ. Give me 20 minutes and I can take out the SA-7 team. Brennan stared at her for a long moment. Behind him, Preacher coughed and blood flecked his lips. Time was running out. "You have 15 minutes, Garrett. If that missile team is not down by then, Preacher dies and we all die trying to save him." Sarah nodded and broke away from the formation, moving at a run toward the high ground. Behind her, she heard Davis's voice. "Major, she can make that shot. I have seen what she can do." Brennan's response was too quiet for Sarah to hear, but she did not need to hear it. She had her orders. She had 15 minutes to do the impossible. The climb to the high ground took 8 of those minutes. By the time Sarah reached the position she needed, her lungs were screaming and her legs were burning. She dropped into a prone position behind her rifle and scanned for the target. Hill 873 appeared through her scope, and on top of it, clearly visible even at this range, was the SA-7 missile team. 2 men, one holding the launcher tube on his shoulder, the other acting as spotter. Sarah checked her watch. 7 minutes left. She ran the calculations in her head. Range 6,212 meters. Wind 15 miles per hour southeast. Temperature 98 degrees. Altitude 9,500 feet at her position. 11,200 at the target. This was beyond the effective range of her rifle. Beyond the effective range of any rifle. This was a shot that existed in the realm of theoretical possibility, where luck mattered more than skill and divine intervention might be the only thing that made the difference. Sarah dialed in her corrections. Elevation, up 42 minutes of angle. Windage, right 12 minutes. Her scope was already at maximum magnification, but even so, the target was small. The size of her thumbnail at arm's length. She settled into her breathing pattern. 4 seconds in, hold. 4 seconds out. Her heart rate dropped to 50 beats per minute. The radio crackled. Brennan's voice. "Garrett status." Sarah kept her eye in the scope, watching the wind flags on the distant hilltop. 30 seconds, sir." "Preacher does not have 30 seconds. Take the shot now." Sarah's finger moved to the trigger. This was it. The moment that would define everything. If she made this shot, Preacher lived. The team got extracted. The mission continued. If she missed, a Marine died. Maybe more than one. She found the space between heartbeats. She saw her grandfather's face. Imagined him in a prison cell carving coordinates into stone, believing that someday someone would care enough to follow them. She thought about Eric Volkov, wounded but alive, promising that their business was not finished. She thought about Davis, trusting her with his life and the life of his brothers. And then she stopped thinking it all together and became pure instinct, pure training, pure faith in the rifle and the bullet and the mathematics of death. Sarah Garrett squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared. The bullet flew into the sky, a copper-jacketed prayer sent toward a target nearly 4 miles away. And in the valley below, 12 Marines held their breath and waited to see if a 4-foot 11-inch woman from Montana could save their lives with a single impossible shot. The bullet flew for 7.3 seconds before it found its destination. Sarah Garrett did not see the impact. At 6,200 meters, even through the most powerful scope, the target was reduced to a shimmering suggestion of reality, a heat mirage pretending to be a man. What she did see was the SA-7 missile launcher tumble from the shoulder of the Taliban fighter and clatter down the rocky slope of Hill 873. What she heard 3 seconds later was the crack of displaced air as the supersonic projectile reached the target faster than its own sound could follow. Then silence. Sarah worked the bolt of her M40A6, chambering a fresh round purely from habit, her eye never leaving the scope. She scanned the hilltop for movement, for confirmation, for the second fighter who had been acting as spotter. He was running, scrambling down the reverse slope of the hill in a panic that suggested his partner was very much dead. Sarah keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "Target neutralized. Essay. 7 team is down. The corridor is clear. Brennan's response came back immediately, and for the first time since she had met him, she heard something in his voice that might have been relief. Confirmed. Guardian actual Badger 6. Air defense threat is eliminated. We need that medevac now. The command voice responded within seconds. Badger 6, Guardian. Medevac bird is inbound. ETA 4 minutes. Mark your LZ with smoke. Sarah saved her weapon and began the descent from her shooting position, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. By the time she reached the landing zone, the rest of Team 3 had already established a defensive perimeter. Preacher lay in the center, Doc kneeling beside him, with both hands pressed against a chest wound that was bubbling pink froth with every shallow breath. Preacher's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something beyond the sky. His lips moved, forming words that had no sound. Sarah knelt beside Doc, and the corpsman looked up at her with eyes that had seen too many men die and knew the signs too well. Tension pneumothorax. His lung is collapsing. I sealed the hole, but he is bleeding internally. He needs a surgeon in the next 10 minutes, or he does not make it. How long has he been like this? 22 minutes. Since the ambush in the canyon. Sarah looked at Preacher's face, at the gray pallor of his skin, at the way his chest barely moved despite the desperate efforts to draw air. Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Davis, 56 years old, 28 years of service, 2 daughters and a wife back home in North Carolina. A man who had taught her how to survive in this valley and who was now dying in it. She took his hand and his fingers twitched in response. His eyes shifted, found her face, and she saw a recognition flicker there. His lips moved again, and this time Sarah leaned close enough to hear the whisper. Did you make the shot? Sarah squeezed his hand. I made the shot, Master Guns. The bird is coming. Something that might have been a smile touched the corners of Preacher's mouth. Good. I knew you would. Your grandfather would be proud. Then his eyes closed, and for a horrible moment, Sarah thought he was gone. But Doc's fingers were on his neck, checking pulse, and the corpsman nodded. Still with us, barely. The sound of rotor blades cut through the air, growing louder, and the UH-60 Black Hawk medevac helicopter appeared over the ridgeline. It flared hard, nose up, and touched down on the rocky ground with the controlled violence that all helicopter landings seemed to require. The crew chief and a Navy corpsman jumped out before the skids had fully settled, carrying a stretcher between them. They moved with practiced efficiency, loading Preacher with gentle speed, IV lines already being placed, oxygen mask going over his face. Brennan jogged alongside the stretcher as they loaded it into the helicopter, his hand on Preacher's shoulder, speaking words that were lost in the rotor wash. Then the crew chief was waving him back, and the bird was lifting off, climbing fast and hard toward the altitude where medevac helicopters lived and died. Sarah watched it go, watched it become a speck against the vast emptiness of the Afghan sky, carrying with it a man who had been kind to her when kindness was rare. Brennan returned to the perimeter, and his face was a mask of controlled emotion. He gathered the team with a hand signal, and the remaining 8 operators formed a loose circle. Preacher is in good hands. Best medevac crews in the world. If anyone can save him, they will. The operators nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt in their eyes. They had all seen wounds like that before. They all knew the statistics. Brennan continued, his voice taking on the harder edge of command. We still have a mission. 340 Afghan allies trapped in a compound 12 clicks from here. Taliban reinforcements are moving into the area. If we do not get those people out in the next 8 hours, they will be executed. Every man, woman, and child. He paused, letting that sink in. I know we are down 3 men. I know we are all carrying wounds. But those people down there are counting on us, and I will not leave them to die. So we push forward, we complete the mission, and then we go home. Questions? No one spoke. There were no questions because they all knew the answer. Marines did not leave people behind. It was written into the DNA of the Corps, carved into the memorial at Iwo Jima, paid for in blood at Chosin Reservoir, in Khe Sanh and Fallujah. You did not leave people behind. Brennan turned to Sarah, and his eyes held something she had not seen before. Respect, maybe, or trust. Garrett, you are now our primary designated marksman. You proved today that you can make shots that should not be possible. We are going to need that skill set when we hit the compound. Taliban will have overwatch positions on the high ground. Your job is to clear them before we make entry. Yes, sir. One more thing. Brennan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Sarah could hear. That shot you just made, 6,200 meters. I have been doing this for 35 years, and I have never seen anything like it. I was wrong about you. I judged you before you had a chance to prove yourself, and that is on me. You are a Marine, Garrett. A damn good one. Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen, not because she needed Brennan's approval, but because receiving it from a man like him meant something. Thank you, sir. Brennan nodded and raised his voice to address the team. We move in 10 minutes. Check your gear. Hydrate. When we step off, we do not stop until we reach the objective. The team scattered to prepare, and Sarah found a flat rock to sit on while she conducted her own pre-mission checks. Her rifle had fired 9 rounds today. She cleaned the bore, checked the scope mounts, verified the zero had not shifted. Muscle memory and ritual, the kind of busy work that kept the mind from dwelling on the fact that people were trying to kill you. Martinez, one of the younger operators, settled down beside her. He was carrying a SAW, the M249 squad automatic weapon, and his face was streaked with dust and dried sweat. Hell of a shot back there. 6,000 meters. I did not even know rifles could shoot that far. Sarah ran a cleaning patch through her barrel and inspected it for copper fouling. Technically, they cannot. The effective range of this rifle is 1,200 meters. After that, it is less shooting and more hoping. But you made it anyway. Sarah thought about the 7.3 seconds the bullet had been in flight. Thought about all the variables that could have pushed it off course. Wind, temperature, humidity, the rotation of the earth. Luck. I had help. The wind was favorable, the temperature was stable, and someone up there decided Preacher deserved to live. Martinez nodded, and then they sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. My little brother wants to be a Marine. He is 17, enlists next year. He asked me what it is like. I did not know what to tell him. Sarah looked at the young operator, saw the weight he was carrying. Tell him it is the hardest thing he will ever do. Tell him there will be days when he questions why he signed up, when the fear is so strong he can taste it, when the only thing keeping him going is the man on his left and the man on his right. But also tell him that it matters, that the people we save, the lives we protect, they matter. Martinez smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. I will tell him that. Brennan's voice cut through the moment. Time to move. File formation. Weapons tight. The team stood, shouldered their packs, and began the movement toward the objective. The terrain was brutal, a mixture of loose scree and jagged rock that seemed designed specifically to destroy ankles and knees. The sun was past its apex now, beginning the long descent toward evening, but the heat remained oppressive. They moved for 3 hours without contact, covering 8 kilometers of ground that should have taken half that time. The pace was slower now, more cautious, because intelligence indicated they were moving into an area with heavy Taliban presence. Sarah maintained her position in the file, eyes constantly scanning the high ground, looking for the glint of a scope or the shadow of a fighter that did not belong. Her grandfather had taught her that the best way to spot an ambush was to think like the ambusher. Where would you position yourself if you wanted to kill people moving through this terrain? What advantages would you use? What fields of fire would you establish? She was running those calculations when the world exploded. The RPG came from the left flank, screaming out of a crevice in the rock wall with a sound like a freight train compressed into 3 seconds. It struck the ground 15 feet ahead of the lead element and detonated with a blast that turned air into a physical force. Martinez was closest to the impact. The overpressure picked him up and threw him backward like a child's toy. He hit the ground hard, his saw clattering away, and did not move. Contact left. RPG, get to cover. Brennan's voice was already hoarse from shouting over the gunfire that erupted from multiple positions. The ambush was well-planned, well-executed, catching the team in another narrow passage with limited options for maneuver. Sarah dove behind a boulder as bullets cracked overhead, the distinctive sound of AK-47 fire mixing with the heavier thump of a PKM machine gun. She brought her rifle up, scanning for targets, but the smoke from the RPG was obscuring everything. Through the haze, she saw movement. Taliban fighters advancing from the left, using the smoke as cover, trying to close the distance before the Marines could establish a defensive line. Sarah fired twice, fast shots at center mass targets, and saw 2 fighters drop. But there were more behind them, and they were not slowing down. Brennan was on the radio calling for air support, for artillery, for anything that could break the ambush. But the response that came back was not what any of them wanted to hear. Badger 6, Guardian Actual. Air support is unavailable. Taliban have SA-7 teams active throughout the valley. We cannot risk aircraft until those positions are cleared. How many positions? At least 4 confirmed sites, possibly more. Brennan's response was a curse that would have made a drill instructor proud. Sarah risked a glance around her cover. Martinez was still down, blood pooling beneath his head. Doc was trying to reach him, crawling across open ground under fire. Every inch a negotiation with death. She made a decision. Sarah broke from cover and ran toward Martinez, her body bent low, legs pumping as bullets tore up the ground around her. She reached the fallen operator and grabbed him by his plate carrier, dragging him backward with strength born from desperation. A bullet struck the rock beside her head, so close she felt the heat. Another tore through her sleeve, missing skin by millimeters. She pulled Martinez into cover behind a low ridge, and Doc was there immediately, hands moving over the wounded man, checking for injuries, calling out findings. Head trauma, possible skull fracture. He is breathing but unresponsive. Sarah's hands were shaking now, adrenaline making her fingers tremble. She had just run through a kill zone to save a man she barely knew, and the magnitude of that decision was hitting her like a physical weight. Brennan appeared beside her, his face grim. That was either very brave or very stupid, Garrett. Probably both, sir. Brennan almost smiled. Then the moment passed, and he was all business again. We are pinned down. Taliban has us in a 3-sided kill box with heavy weapons and superior numbers. We need to break contact, or we will be overrun within the hour. Sarah looked at the terrain around them. The high ground to the east offered a commanding view of the entire area. If she could reach it, she could provide overwatch while the team displaced. Sir, I can get to that ridgeline. Give me 20 minutes and I can suppress their positions while you move the team. Brennan looked at the ridge, calculating distance and exposure and risk. That is 400 meters of open ground. You will be exposed the entire way. I know, sir, but I do not see another option. For a long moment, Brennan just stared at her. Then he nodded. 20 minutes. If you are not in position by then, we move without you. Sarah checked her ammunition. 4 magazines left, 80 rounds. It would have to be enough. She looked at Martinez, still unconscious, and at Doc working to stabilize him. Looked at the 7 remaining operators of Team 3, exhausted and wounded and still fighting. Then she took a deep breath and ran. The 400 meters felt like 4 miles. Sarah sprinted across open ground with every Taliban fighter in the area shooting at her. Bullets kicked up dirt at her feet. Tracers drew lines of light through the air so close she could feel their passage. She did not stop, did not slow, did not give them a stationary target. A round struck her pack, punching through the fabric and destroying her water bladder. Another grazed her thigh, burning like a brand, but not deep enough to slow her down. Halfway across, she zigged left as a burst of machine gun fire tore up the ground where she had been running, then zagged right as another shooter tried to lead her. At 300 meters, her lungs were burning and her legs felt like they were filled with lead. At 200 meters, she was running on pure willpower and the knowledge that if she stopped, she died. At 100 meters, the slope began, and she was climbing, hands and feet scrambling for purchase on loose rock. At 50 meters, a bullet struck the stone beside her hand, and she felt shrapnel slice into her palm. Blood made her grip slick, but she did not let go. At 25 meters, she could see the top of the ridge, could see the position she needed to reach. At 10 meters, someone below got smart and fired an RPG. It struck the slope beneath her and detonated. The blast wave picked her up and threw her the last few feet onto the ridgeline. She landed hard, her rifle skittering away, the air knocked from her lungs. For 5 seconds, she could not breathe, could not move, could only lie there and wonder if she was dying. Then her lungs remembered how to work, and air rushed in with painful force. She crawled to her rifle, grabbed it, and pulled herself into a firing position. Through her scope, the battlefield was laid out like a tactical map. Taliban positions, muzzle flashes, movement, targets. Sarah began to shoot. She fired with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed, each trigger pressed deliberate. The rifle became an extension of her will, and her will was focused on keeping the Marines below alive. First target, PKM gunner at 380 meters, center mass, he dropped. Second target, RPG team at 410 meters, 2 shots, 2 kills. Third target, Taliban commander coordinating the assault, 500 meters, headshot. The enemy fire began to slacken as fighters realized they were being picked off by an unseen shooter. They went to ground, seeking cover, losing the initiative. Brennan's voice came through the radio. "Good shooting, Raven. Keep them pinned. We are moving." Sarah watched through her scope as Team 3 began to displace, moving by fire teams, one element covering while the other moved. It was textbook infantry tactics executed with the precision of professionals who had done this 1,000 times. She continued to fire, placing rounds where they were needed, breaking up any attempt by the Taliban to pursue. Then she saw him. On a ridge across this valley, partially concealed but not concealed enough, was a figure she recognized. White hair beneath a Pikol hat, a Dragunov rifle, Erich Volkov. He was wounded, his left arm hanging useless, but he had his rifle up and was aiming down at the Marines below. Sarah shifted her aim, putting her crosshairs on the Russian sniper. Range 4,800 meters, wind, variable, angle, extreme. She had one shot before he saw her, one chance to end the threat. Her finger moved to the trigger. Then Volkov's rifle swung toward her. He had seen her. They were looking at each other across nearly 5,000 meters of empty air, two snipers who had been hunting each other all day. For a heartbeat, neither fired. It was a standoff, a moment of mutual recognition between professionals who understood that the next seconds would determine who lived and who died. Then Volkov's rifle flashed. Sarah threw herself sideways as the bullet cracked past her position. She rolled, came up in a new spot, and fired back. But Volkov was already moving, already gone from his position, disappearing behind the rocks like a ghost. Sarah scanned for him, but he was gone, vanished into the terrain with the skill of someone who had been doing this for 40 years. The radio crackled. "Raven, Badger 6, we are clear of the kill zone. Return to the team. We are moving to the objective." Sarah saved her weapon and began the descent from the ridge. Her hands were still shaking, and blood from her wounded palm had made the grip of her rifle slick. Below, Team 3 had consolidated in a defensive position. Martinez was awake now, groggy but conscious, with a field dressing wrapped around his head. Doc gave Sarah a nod that might have been approval or might have been gratitude. Brennan approached, and his expression was difficult to read. "The Russian sniper. Volkov. Did you get him?" "Negative, sir. He was in position, but he displaced before I could take the shot." "So he is still out there?" "Yes, sir. And he knows where we are going." Brennan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he made a decision. "Then we need to get there first. Double time from here to the objective. No stops, no breaks. We hit the compound, extract the civilians, and get out before Volkov or the Taliban reinforcements can hit us." The team moved out, and this time the pace was brutal. They covered the remaining 4 kilometers in 90 minutes, a forced march that left everyone gasping and exhausted. The compound appeared as the sun began to set, a collection of buildings surrounded by high walls in a valley that was rapidly filling with shadows. Through binoculars, Sarah could see movement inside. Civilians, the people they had come to save. But she could also see something else. Taliban fighters on the surrounding ridges, at least 30, maybe more. And they were not preparing to assault the compound. They were preparing to defend it. Someone had gotten there first. Brennan lowered his binoculars, his jaw tight. "It is a trap. They knew we were coming. They have been waiting for us." The radio crackled, and a familiar voice cut through. Not Volkov this time, but someone new, American accent. CIA. "Major Brennan, this is Carver, CIA Station Chief. I need you to stand down and pull your team back." Brennan's response was immediate and hard. "Negative. We have civilians in that compound who need extraction." "Those civilians are already dead, Major. The Taliban executed them 2 hours ago. What you are looking at is bait. They want you to assault that compound so they can wipe out your entire team." Sarah felt ice water flood her veins. 340 people. Dead. Brennan's voice shook with barely controlled rage. "You are telling me we came all this way, lost 3 men, and the people we were supposed to save were already dead? I am telling you that this mission was compromised from the start. Someone leaked the operation to the Taliban. They have been one step ahead of us the entire time. And if you go into that compound, you will die. All of you." Brennan looked at his team. 8 Marines, battered and bloody, staring at a compound full of corpses. Then Sarah spoke, her voice quiet but carrying. "Sir, if the CIA knew the mission was compromised, why did they not recall us before we inserted?" There was a long silence on the radio. Then Carver responded, and his voice was different now. Colder. Because some missions serve more than one purpose, Sergeant. Your team was never supposed to extract those civilians. You were supposed to draw out Taliban leadership so we could target them with drone strikes. Congratulations, you succeeded. Brennan's face went white, then red with rage. You used us as bait. You sent us into a kill zone knowing we would be ambushed, knowing people would die, just so you could get a few Taliban commanders. Welcome to the war on terror, Major. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. Before Brennan could respond, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Not one bird, multiple. Sarah looked up and saw 3 Apache gunships appearing over the ridgeline, their weapons pods loaded with Hellfire missiles. The radios crackled again, this time with a different voice. The Apache flight leader. Guardian 6-1, targets acquired. Permission to engage. And Sarah understood. The CIA was not here to save them. They were here to finish the job. To kill everyone in and around that compound, Taliban and Marines alike, and blame it on the enemy. They were all supposed to die here. Brennan understood too. His hand moved to his rifle, and every operator in Team 3 raised their weapons, not at the Taliban positions, but at the sky where the Apaches circled like vultures. It was not a fight they could win, but Marines did not surrender. They went down fighting. Then a new voice cut through the radio, old, accented, Russian. CIA Mahan. This is Eric Volkov. I have a Stinger missile locked on your lead Apache. If you fire on those Marines, I will shoot you out of the sky, and then I will hunt you down and kill you slowly. Do we have an understanding? The silence that followed was absolute. Then Carver's voice, tight with fury. You do not have the authority to interfere with the CIA operation. I have a surface-to-air missile and a grudge. That is all the authority I need. The Apaches continued to circle, but they did not fire. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, Carver spoke again. Stand down. All units, stand down. Badger 6, extract your team. This operation is terminated. The Apaches banked away, disappearing into the darkening sky. And on a ridge 4,000 meters away, a Russian sniper lowered his weapon and vanished into the night. Brennan keyed his radio one last time. Volkov, why? The response came back immediately. Because your sergeant reminded me that some debts are bigger than revenge. Get your men out of here, Major, and tell Sarah Garrett that her grandfather was a better man than I gave him credit for. Then silence. Team 3 turned and began the long walk back to extraction, leaving behind a compound full of ghosts and a war that had stolen more than it could ever give back. And Sarah Garrett walked with them, carrying her rifle and her grandfather's memory, knowing that some truths were too heavy to bear alone. The extraction helicopter came at dawn, appearing out of the pink and gold sky like a mechanical angel sent to collect the survivors of a war that had long since lost any meaning it might have once had. Staff Sergeant Sarah Garrett sat on a boulder at the edge of the landing zone, watching the Chinook descend through air that was still cool enough to see her breath. Her uniform was torn and stained with blood, some of it hers, most of it belonging to other people. Her hands were wrapped in gauze where the rock climb had shredded her palms. Her right thigh was bandaged where a bullet had carved a furrow through muscle without hitting bone. She had been awake for 38 hours, and exhaustion sat on her shoulders like a physical weight. But she was alive. They were all alive. 8 Marines walking out of a valley that had been designed to kill them. Major Tom Brennan stood 20 feet away, speaking into a satellite phone with the kind of controlled fury that came from a career of following orders he disagreed with. Sarah could not hear the conversation, but she could read his body language. The rigid posture, the clenched jaw, the way his free hand kept curling into a fist and releasing over and over. Someone on the other end of that call was getting a piece of Brennan's mind, and Sarah suspected it was someone who ranked high enough to make his career very uncomfortable when this was over. The Chinook touched down, rotors still turning, and the crew chief waved them aboard. The team moved like old men, their bodies protesting every step, adrenaline long since burned away and replaced with the kind of deep exhaustion that came from the body's realization that it had survived something it should not have. Martinez was first aboard, helped by Doc. The head wound had left him with double vision and a concussion, but he could walk. Preacher was already at Bagram Air Base in surgery, with a 50-50 chance of seeing tomorrow. The rest of the team had various cuts, bruises, and wounds that would heal with time and leave scars that would not. Sarah was last aboard, and as she grabbed the crew chief's hand to pull herself up, she caught sight of movement on a distant ridge, a figure alone, watching the extraction. Even at this distance, even without optics, she knew who it was. Eric Volkov, standing sentinel over their departure like some ancient warrior seeing off a worthy opponent. She raised her hand in acknowledgement. The figure raised his in return. Then he turned and disappeared into the rocks, and Sarah knew with certainty that she would never see him again. The helicopter lifted off, and Afghanistan fell away beneath them. Sarah pressed her face against the window and watched the Panjshir Valley shrink into the distance. Watched the mountains become wrinkles in the earth. Watched the place where her grandfather had died 36 years ago become just another piece of terrain in a country that had been swallowing soldiers since Alexander the Great. Brennan settled into the seat beside her, the satellite phone finally silent. His face was gray with fatigue, and new lines had appeared around his eyes in the last 24 hours. "How is Preacher?" Sarah asked, having to shout over the rotor noise. Brennan shook his head. "Still in surgery. They are doing everything they can. Doc says if he makes it through the next 12 hours, he has a chance." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Davis, who had taught her how to survive, who had trusted her with his life and the lives of his brothers, was fighting for every breath while she sat in a helicopter, flying towards safety. Brennan leaned closer so he would not have to shout. "When we get to Bagram, there will be a debriefing. CIA will be there. They will want to know what happened, and they will want to control the narrative. They will try to classify everything, bury it under national security protocols, make it disappear." He paused, and his eyes met Sarah's. "I am not going to let that happen. I am 58 years old, 6 months from retirement. They cannot do anything to me that matters anymore. But you are 26 with your whole career ahead of you. If you speak up about what happened, about how the CIA used us as bait, about the civilians who were already dead, they will make your life very difficult." Sarah thought about the 340 people who had died in that compound, thought about Preacher bleeding out on a surgical table, thought about her grandfather, who had spent 13 years in captivity and died trying to tell a truth that no one wanted to hear. "Sir, with respect, if I wanted an easy life, I would not have become a Marine." Brennan smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Your grandfather would have said the same thing." The flight to Bagram took 4 hours, long enough for Sarah to drift in and out of a sleep that was haunted by the faces of the dead. When they finally landed, she was escorted directly to a medical tent, where a Navy corpsman cleaned and dressed her wounds with efficient gentleness. The bullet graze on her thigh required 12 stitches. The shrapnel cuts on her palm needed 6 each. The corpsman, a young kid who looked like he should still be in high school, kept up a steady stream of small talk while he worked, asking about the mission in a way that suggested he already knew more than he was supposed to. "You are the sniper, right? The one who made that 6,000-meter shot? News travels fast." The corpsman grinned. "Fast? The whole base is talking about it. They are saying it is the longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history. Maybe in all of military history." Sarah flexed her bandaged hand, testing the stitches. "It was not a kill, it was a weapon disable. And I had a lot of help from the wind. Still, 6,000 meters, that is like shooting from one zip code to another." When the corpsman finished, Sarah was directed to a building that looked like every other temporary structure on the base. Plywood walls, corrugated metal roof, air conditioning units that roared like jet engines. Inside, a conference room had been set up with a long table and chairs that had seen better deployments. Brennan was already there, along with the 7 other members of Team 3 who could still walk. At the head of the table sat a man in civilian clothes who radiated the kind of authority that came from decades of operating in shadows. His name tag read Carver, and Sarah recognized the voice from the radio. CIA Station Chief, the man who had tried to have them killed. Carver stood when she entered, and his smile was practiced and empty. "Sergeant Garrett, please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah sat, keeping her face neutral. Across the table, Martinez gave her a small nod. Doc was focused on a notepad, writing something with careful precision. Brennan was staring at Carver with the kind of intensity that made lesser men uncomfortable. Carver opened a folder and began without preamble. "First, let me say that what happened in the Panjshir Valley was a tragedy. The loss of civilian life is always regrettable. However, I want to make sure everyone in this room understands the bigger picture. The intelligence we gathered from that operation has already led to 3 high-value target strikes. Taliban command and control in that region has been significantly degraded. From a strategic standpoint, the mission was a success." Brennan's voice was ice cold. 340 people are dead. My team was sent into an ambush, and you are calling it a success. Carver met his gaze without flinching. I am calling it a necessary sacrifice in a war that does not have clean solutions. You have been doing this long enough to know that sometimes the mission requires difficult choices. Those people trusted us to save them. Those people were already compromised. Taliban intelligence had identified every single one of them. If we had extracted them, they would have been hunted down and executed anyway, along with their families. At least this way, their death served a purpose. Sarah felt sick. She had heard justifications like this before, the kind of moral calculus that reduced human beings to numbers on a spreadsheet. But hearing it from someone who was supposed to be on their side was something else entirely. Doc looked up from his notepad, and his voice was quiet but carried weight. How long have you known the mission was compromised? Carver hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sarah saw the truth. We received intelligence 3 days before your team inserted that Taliban had advanced knowledge of the operation. 3 days. Brennan's voice was barely above a whisper. You knew for 3 days and you sent us anyway. The operation had already been approved at the highest levels. Changing course would have required explanations we were not prepared to give. Sarah could not stay silent anymore. So you let us walk into a trap. You let Marines die so you could avoid an awkward conversation with your bosses. Carver turned to her, and his eyes were flat and emotionless. I made a tactical decision based on incomplete information in a fluid situation. That is what we do in this business, Sergeant. We make hard choices that people like you will never have to make. Martinez slammed his hand on the table and everyone jumped. People like us? We are the ones who got shot at. We are the ones who had to leave Preacher bleeding on a helicopter. We are the people who do the actual fighting while you sit in air-conditioned offices and move us around like pieces on a chessboard. Carver's expression did not change, and that is precisely why I make the decisions and you follow orders. Because someone has to see the bigger picture. Brennan stood up, and the movement had the finality of a door closing. I have spent 35 years following orders. Good orders and bad orders. Legal orders and orders that kept me awake at night. But I have never, not once, followed an order that deliberately sent my men to die for someone else's career advancement. This operation was not about gathering intelligence. It was about you covering up a leak in your network. Those civilians died because someone in your organization sold them out, and you used my team to clean up your mess. Carver's mask slipped for just a moment, and Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear. That is a very serious accusation, Major, one that would require proof you do not have. Brennan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. He set it on the table between them. This is a recording of every radio transmission from the operation, including the one where you admitted the mission was compromised and that you sent us anyway, including the one where you ordered Apache strikes on American Marines, and including the one where a Russian mercenary had to threaten you to keep you from committing murder. He pushed the recorder toward Carver. I have already uploaded copies to 3 separate secure servers. If anything happens to me or anyone on my team, those recordings will be released to the press, to Congress, and to the Inspector General. So before you start making threats about classification and national security, you should understand that your career is now in my hands. The room was silent. Carver stared at the recorder like it was a live grenade. Finally, he spoke, and all the confidence was gone from his voice. What do you want? Brennan sat back down, and his voice was calm again. I want the truth about what happened to Colonel James Garrett in 1985. All of it. Not the sanitized version in the official file, but the real story. And I want it in writing, declassified, so his family knows what happened to him. Carver shook his head. That information is classified at the highest levels. I do not have the authority to release it. Then find someone who does. You have 72 hours. If I do not have a full accounting of what happened to Colonel Garrett, I send the recordings to every news organization in America. You would destroy your own career. Brennan smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. I am 6 months from retirement. My career is already over. But yours is not. So you have a choice. Give me the truth, or spend the rest of your life explaining to congressional committees why you tried to have a Marine unit killed to cover up your mistakes. Carver stood, gathered his folder, and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back to look at Sarah. Your grandfather was a good Marine, but he asked too many questions and found answers that powerful people wanted to stay buried. If you follow in his footsteps, you will end up the same way. Then he was gone and the door closed behind him with a soft click. Sarah looked at Brennan. Do you think he will do it? Give us the truth? Brennan shrugged. He does not have a choice. The recordings are real, and they end his career if they go public. He will give us what we want. And if he does not, then we burn it all down and let the pieces fall where they may. The 72 hours passed like 72 years. Sarah spent the time in the medical tent checking on Preacher, who had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. She sat beside his bed and held his hand and told him stories about her grandfather, about Montana, about anything that might give him a reason to keep fighting. On the second day, Preacher woke up. His eyes opened, found Sarah's face, and something like recognition flickered there. Did we save them? His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah thought about lying, thought about giving him a version of events that would be easier to carry. But Preacher deserved the truth. No, they were already gone before we got there. Preacher closed his eyes and a single tear rolled down his cheek. Then what was it all for? Sarah squeezed his hand. We saved each other. That counts for something. On the third day, Carver returned. He looked like he had not slept, and his eyes were bloodshot. He carried a briefcase that he set on the table with the weight of something far heavier than paper and ink. Brennan, Sarah, and the entire team were present. Carver opened the briefcase and pulled out a file stamped with so many classification markings, it looked like modern art. What I am about to tell you is compartmented information. Officially, this conversation never happened. Unofficially, you have earned the right to know. He opened the file and began to read. In 1972, Colonel James Garrett was shot down over North Vietnam and presumed killed. However, he survived and was taken to the Hoa Lo prison facility in Hanoi. Normal protocol would have been to hold him with other POWs and use him for propaganda purposes. But Colonel Garrett was not a normal prisoner. Carver paused, choosing his words carefully. Before his deployment, Colonel Garrett had been part of a classified program training Marine snipers in advanced reconnaissance techniques. He had access to information about CIA operations throughout Southeast Asia, including black sites, assassination programs, and cooperation with local warlords. The North Vietnamese recognized his intelligence value and offered him to the Soviet Union in exchange for military aid. Sarah felt her stomach drop. In 1973, Colonel Garrett was transferred to Soviet custody and moved to a facility in Afghanistan where the Soviets were beginning to increase their military presence. For the next 12 years, he was held in a prison that did not officially exist, used as a training aid to teach Soviet and Afghan forces about American tactics. But in 1985, something changed. A KGB officer named Yuri Volkov was also imprisoned at the same facility, accused of passing information to the Mujahideen. The two men, despite being enemies on paper, became allies out of necessity. They planned an escape together. Carver flipped to another page. On May 4, 1985, Garrett and Volkov overpowered a guard and reached a Soviet Mi-24 helicopter. They managed to get it airborne, but they were pursued by KGB security forces. The helicopter was hit by ground fire and crashed in the Panjshir Valley. He looked up at Sarah. Both men survived the crash, but they were badly injured and knew they would not survive if they stayed together. They made a decision. Volkov would draw the pursuit away, giving Garrett a chance to escape. Volkov knew he was dying from his injuries, so he gave Garrett his dog tags and told him to tell the world what had happened. Sarah's voice was shaking. What happened to my grandfather? Carver pulled out a photograph, old and faded. It showed a man in tattered prison clothes, face gaunt from starvation, but eyes that were still defiant. Colonel Garrett made it another 3 days. He was recaptured by KGB forces and died during interrogation. His body was buried in an unmarked grave in the valley. When the prison site was demolished in 2019, his remains were finally identified and returned to the United States. He slid the file across the table to Sarah. Your grandfather spent 13 years in captivity, and he never broke. Never gave up classified information. Never stopped trying to get home. He was a hero in every sense of the word. Sarah opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were documents, photographs, interrogation transcripts, her grandfather's handwriting, describing his captivity in careful detail. Maps he had drawn of the prison, names of other prisoners who had not made it home. And at the very bottom, a letter, written in his hand, dated May 7, 1985. To whoever finds this, my name is Colonel James Garrett, United States Marine Corps. I have been held prisoner for 13 years. I am dying, but before I go, I need the truth to be known. The men and women who serve this country deserve better than to be forgotten in places that do not exist. If you are reading this, please tell my family I never stopped fighting to get home. Tell them I love them. Tell my granddaughter Sarah that she should be proud of who she is and never let anyone make her feel small. The world needs people who stand tall, regardless of their height. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her grandfather had known about her, had thought about her in his final days, had left her a message across 36 years. Brennan's hand settled on her shoulder. It's always on her shoulder, gentle and understanding. Carver closed his briefcase. Yuri Volkov's body was never found. For years, we assumed he had died in the wilderness. But based on recent events, it appears he survived. He spent the last 36 years in these mountains, watching over the place where he and your grandfather made their stand. His son, Eric, came here looking for revenge, but found something else instead. What? Sarah asked. Carver almost smiled. Respect. Your grandfather and Yuri Volkov were enemies who became brothers. Eric saw that same transformation happen with you in his father's memory. That is why he saved you, because you honored what his father and your grandfather built in their final days. Carver stood to leave. The official story remains unchanged. Colonel Garrett died in the prison camp. This file will be sealed for another 50 years. But you have the truth now. What you do with it is up to you. After he left, the team sat in silence. Finally, Martinez spoke. So what do we do? Brennan looked at each of them in turn. We honor their memory by being the kind of Marines they would be proud of. We tell the truth when we can, we keep faith with each other, and we never forget that the mission is not about winning wars. It is about bringing each other home. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Arlington National Cemetery wearing her dress blues. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the white headstones that stretched in perfect rows as far as the eye could see. Her grandfather's grave was in Section 60, among the veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. The headstone was simple: name, rank, dates of service. It did not tell the story of 13 years in captivity, or a desperate escape attempt, or a final letter written to a granddaughter he would never see grow up. But Sarah knew the story now, all of it. She placed fresh flowers at the base of the headstone and stepped back. Major Tom Brennan stood beside her, retired now, wearing a suit that looked uncomfortable on his frame. He would have been proud of you, Brennan said. Sarah thought about the last 6 months. The Medal of Honor ceremony where the president had placed the medal around her neck for actions in the Panjshir Valley. The promotion to staff sergeant. The assignment to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School as an instructor, teaching the next generation of Marines how to make impossible shots. I hope so. Brennan handed her an envelope. This came for you yesterday. It was forwarded through several intermediaries, but I traced it back to Pakistan. Sarah opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in precise handwriting. Sergeant Garrett, your grandfather and my father were better men than either of us will ever be. They found honor in a place without honor, and friendship in a place designed to destroy such things. You have inherited their strength. Use it wisely. The world needs more people who know when to fight and when to show mercy. Eric Volkov. Sarah folded the letter carefully and put it in her pocket. A voice called out from behind them. Sarah turned to see Preacher approaching, walking with a cane, but walking nonetheless. 6 months of rehabilitation had put weight back on his frame and color back in his face. He would never be fully recovered, but he was alive, and that was enough. The whole team is here, Preacher said. We figured your grandfather deserved a proper honor guard. Sarah looked past him and saw them. Martinez, healed from his concussion. Doc, carrying his medical bag like always. The other 5 operators from Team 3 gathered in dress blues. They formed up around the grave, came to attention, and rendered a salute that was crisp and perfect and carried the weight of everything they had been through together. Brennan called out in his command voice, the one that had led men through 35 years of war. Present arms. 7 rifles came up in unison. Fire. The volley of gunfire rolled across the cemetery, echoing off the headstones. A 21-gun salute for a man who had died alone in a valley far from home, but who had never been forgotten. When it was done, when the ceremony was over and the team began to disperse, Sarah stayed behind. She sat on the grass beside her grandfather's grave and pulled out the letter he had written 36 years ago. She read it one more time, letting the words settle into her bones. Then she spoke to the headstone, to the man beneath it, to the memory that had shaped her entire life. I understand now. You did not leave those coordinates so someone would come looking for you. You left them so someone would find the truth. Not just about what happened, but about who you were. A Marine who never quit, a father who never stopped loving his family, a man who found brotherhood in the most unlikely place. She stood, brushed the grass from her uniform, and came to attention. Mission complete, Grandpa. You can rest now. Then Staff Sergeant Sarah Garrett walked away from Arlington National Cemetery, carrying her grandfather's legacy forward into a world that still needed people who stood tall, regardless of their height, who fought for truth, regardless of the mob, and who understood that the real war was not against enemies, foreign or domestic, but against the darkness that tried to make good people forget why they put on the uniform in the first place. Behind her, the sun set over the cemetery, painting the white headstones in shades of gold and red. And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, an old Russian sniper looked at the same sunset and remembered two men who had been enemies, who had become friends, and who had taught their children that some bonds transcend the wars that create them. The last shot had been fired. The war was over, and the ghost could finally rest. END.